I'm Madhusuri Prakash. I teach in the College of Education. I teach in a department called Educational Policy Studies, and my particular specialty within Educational Policy Studies is philosophy of education. And it has been a privilege for me at Penn State to meet kindred spirits who were really very mindfully, very thoughtfully looking at what has happened to indigenous knowledge for 500 years of colonialism and then 6 development decades. So we're almost talking about 6 centuries of the desecration of indigenous knowledge as irrelevant, as primitive, as backward, as something to be obliterated from the earth so we could go on the highway of progress. A story that's particularly pertinent in the age of the triple crisis, which is the energy crisis, the global warming crisis, and the food crisis. When the Cold War ended, the moment Gorbachev lost power, Cuba stopped receiving that fabulous thing called Soviet aid. And as soon as they stopped receiving that aid, they couldn't run the Soviet-style farms, the mega farms that required tractors, that required fertilizers, that required pesticides, that required all the fossil fuel, accessories of the Green Revolution. So basically, a country that had been dependent on Soviet subsidized food, Soviet subsidized agriculture, ended up starving for 10 years. Some figures are the average Cubano lost 20 pounds. What were they going to turn to? Human power, animal power. And today, Havana is after 10 years, they taught themselves, they recovered their indigenous knowledge, they turned to their elders, they turned Havana, a city, into one of the greenest cities that is feeding itself. I think 80% of Havana people in Havana feed themselves by getting their food. They become what is called locavores. They're a model for the world, which means their food is not transported long distances, as is the food of the typically developed person. Do you know how far an American mouthful travels? Every mouthful? Because we have an assembly line stretching all across the world, of course, funneled by Middle East oil and Alaska oil. Do you know how far each American mouthful travels? Well, it's worth finding out. It's something everyone must find out. And I would recommend that film, Community Solutions in Cuba, to every person on earth today, because it shows the power of indigenous knowledge. It shows the power of people who stop relying on the developed countries and start self-reliance. And Cuba is today a world example. Another country that is even ahead of Cuba in terms of sustainability and the global or the Happy Planet Index is Costa Rica. Costa Rica is number 1. Cuba is number 7. Bhutan is number 17. And the most developed country in the world in terms of the planetary crisis it's creating in terms of world hunger, global warming, sweatshops is, of course, the United States. Its position in terms of how it ranks in the global planetary happiness index is really worth studying. And it's causing this misery because one of the reasons is how much fossil fuels it uses to transport its own food. If every country in the world did what the United States does just in terms of feeding itself, we need 6 planets. That's common knowledge. And so today, if we are to learn about sustainability, if we are to learn about having a sustainable footprint, we can't turn to the United States and to other developed countries. We have to turn to countries that today are called underdeveloped. And that's why I mentioned Costa Rica, Cuba, and Bhutan.